This is TWiT.
This episode of Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. The days of boring training methods are over. Meaningful impact shows up as high engagement, which translates to optimal performance. Your team deserves to feel entertained and empowered to keep your organization secure. Fill out the form at go.acilearning.com/twit for information on a free 2-week trial for your team. How good was it?
Yeah. I'll tell you how good it was. I spent 3 hours this morning feverishly writing an analysis of the earnings and with the hope of figuring out where they're paying for AI. And I have to say, I don't do this a lot with Microsoft, but I got the answer.
Oh, wow.
So it was kind of fun. But just to the earnings, let's see.
What's the top line? They made money, right?
Giant pile of money.
Net income of $20.1 billion in the quarter on revenues.
That's
of
profit?
20
billion. Okay.
56.2 billion. So also the end of their fiscal year. So for the fiscal year, net income of $72.4 billion and revenues of $212 billion.
That's pretty good
Double-digit
yearly
gains,
income. So this is not their biggest quarter. This is a smaller quarter compared.
A smaller quarter. Yeah, this was a small one. I mean,
they're making more than $1 billion a week. Profit.
Yeah, they're doing okay. They announced a new $1 billion business, which we'll get to. Intelligent cloud, biggest business, right? This is Azure, right? $24 billion in revenues. Not the first time it's been over $20 billion. Up 15% year over year. That thing's
How
going
does that compare to
gangbusters.
AWS?
Well, it doesn't. So Microsoft invents something called the Microsoft Cloud that they use to compare to AWS, and I refuse to discuss it because it's made up. So I don't even know the number. Yeah, screw them. Well, the reason is they cherry pick parts of their business that could be in often are in other parts of the business, other business units, and I just whatever.
Do they do that to make their numbers look more favorable?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I was telling Richard before the show.
That wouldn't be nice.
Richard is still settling into my quarterly mania over earnings. You might want to. This medicine that will help. It's
going to take a few more quarters. I think.
Yeah, you'll get used to it. But one of the things that's happened over the years is, and probably not just with Microsoft, but I'm kind of laser focused on Microsoft, obviously. So Microsoft has gotten vaguer and vaguer and vaguer when it comes to reporting the financial results of individual businesses or products and things. They talk in terms of, this thing revenue growth was X%, where you never know what it began at. So there's no way to know what it is, that kind of stuff. So there's tons and tons of that. We're going to go through a lot of it. But anyway, Azure's the biggest part, or Intelligent Cloud, which is mostly Azure. Productivity and business processes. This is Microsoft 365, LinkedIn Dynamics. It's basically Office, Microsoft, and Microsoft 365. 18.3 billion in revenues, gained a 10% year over year. So those two businesses both grew double digits, which they've been doing, and they are both on this kind of upward trajectory. There was a time back when the business units were all making about $11 billion a piece, where they were kind of roughly even. Mm-hmm. So those two have gone from 11 to 24 and 18 billion respectively. More personal computing, which is the third and the smallest of these, has gone from 11 to about 13, depending on the quarter. It kind of goes up and down. This particular quarter, there were 13.9 billion in revenues, a decline of 4% year over year. And it's for all the obvious reasons. Windows revenues down, PC market stinks. We're going to get to that. Surface tanked hard, 20% year over year.
Like every other PC maker.
Yeah, maybe worse than every other, but yes, in the ballpark for sure. Mm-hmm. And then gaming was basically flat. So familiar kind of trend there where Xbox hardware, meaning consoles mostly, but also peripherals, down big, and software and services up to a minor degree. It basically works out to be flat. So that's the mile high view on Microsoft. I don't dive into all of it, but every quarter I write kind of an analysis about the parts of the business I care about most. I actually skipped over Microsoft 365 this time by mistake, but it still ended up being one of my longest articles on this topic. But I think we can condense. So yes, so Windows and Surface are both impacted by the broader trends in the PC market, right? No surprise there. Windows revenues from PC makers fell 12% year over year. Let me see if I can find the numbers. Yep. So subsequent or the previous sequential quarters, 15, 39, and 28% drops. So in that sense, hopefully we've crested that hill, but the way Microsoft's talking is they don't actually expect to see any relief anytime soon. And this coming quarter is going to also have a double-digit revenue drop from PC makers. So not good there. The commercial stuff is okay for Windows. Nothing, much to say. In fact, in addition to being vague about reporting on different businesses, the other way they can be vague is by not mentioning them. So they've done that all over the place in this report. So with regards to PC sales, for example, they're not separating out consumer and business sales. They're not separating out Windows revenues from commercial licenses, which is businesses. We can guess as to the reasons why. I think it has to do with the fact that Windows 11 still is not seeing strong uptick with businesses.
On the enterprise side, for sure.
Yeah, that's my guess.
I got a couple of things that I find interesting. One is, why did they break out enterprise mobility, whatever that is, from intelligent cloud? Because near as I can tell, enterprise mobility is Azure Active Directory.
Well, yeah. So the biggest chunk of that is probably what used to be, or maybe it's still called Intune.
Right.
And when you talk about seats, this is the number of businesses that are using what we'll call like a light touch cloud-based management infrastructure as opposed to full-blown, right? This somebody better than anybody, but I mean, just so people listening. That's an interesting one because, for two reasons. You called it out. Why is it part of intelligent cloud? Interesting. I guess because it's a cloud service, right?
Well, and so why is it broken out separately? Like, it's just bizarre that you would talk about. I don't know
why, but I'll take it to another level and say, why do they actually give us the seats? They actually, this is the rare area where we know an actual hard number, which is the literal number of users.
Except we don't know what that number is. We don't know why it's important, and we don't know why you told us.
I know. Because Windows, which is part of more personal computing, has commercial PC or commercial licenses associated with it, you would assume that this would be maybe in Microsoft 365, maybe be in, I don't know.
Well, there's the thing is you can't use cloud or 365 without it.
Actually, okay. I'm talking through this. Let me guess. Here's my guess. This type of management infrastructure used to be provided by on-prem servers, right? Windows Server, and then whatever servers you would run on top. What was it called? They still have it. What's the heavy system management or whatever the hell it's called?
System Center.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So Intune and System Center followed kind of diverging and converging paths depending on the year. Yeah. But okay. Those revenues are part of intelligent cloud because it also includes server, which is kind of a legacy business. So it's kind of cloud and legacy. So I guess this is because the cloud part of it Intune is cloud, and AAD or whatever we're calling it this week is cloud. I mean, that might be. I think that's why. I guess
I'm not going to say Entra. Oh, damn!
I refuse to say Microsoft Cloud's not coming out of my mouth, and whatever you just said, and then I'll do this every time you say it.
Absolutely.
All right. One fun bit of news for Windows, sort of. The combined revenues from Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365, which obviously shares a common infrastructure. This is
right.
Remote
Both products, we're still trying to figure out why they're making them, right?
Here's why. This fiscal year, for the first time, crossed $1 billion in revenues.
So this is the new $1 billion business.
That's right.
They're finally getting.
Which is nice because it's replacing Surface, which I believe is very much no longer a $1 billion business. In fact, it's probably way south of that.
Well, let's talk about the Surface side, because why are their hardware sales down? I guess everybody else took the hardware numbers a quarter earlier. Why are theirs later?
I think here we have to speculate. So this is, of all the stuff I looked at in Microsoft's earnings announcements, I go through all of it, but I'm looking for specific things, right?
Right.
There was one item on this particular report where it was literally the sound of record scratch, car screeching to a halt before it hit something, and it was Surface.
Right.
And in their actual publicly available report, first of all, they don't use the term Surface even once. The term Surface did not come up even once in the post-earnings conference call. They've started calling it devices. And the reason is I don't know if this is the reason is, but they pulled HoloLens into this thing. So now it's Surface plus HoloLens.
Right.
For the most part, HoloLens does not contribute meaningfully in any way with revenues.
No, it's a niche experimental product.
So I think when we look at devices, we can kind of say this is a Surface, right? I mean, and we have historical trends to look at. We can kind of prove that might be true or whatever. Devices is Surfaces. I refuse to call this thing devices. That's another one of my little mental pet peeves. Anyway, there was one sentence actually, I will use the term, devices revenues declined 20%. That's all it said. There was no context. There was no nothing.
What market spaces, what devices.
Yep. There was a chart that showed, and it's funny here again, they cherry pick. They don't show everything, but one of the things they showed, for example, they don't show console sale growth or loss quarter to quarter, even though they talk about it, but they did show Surface over 4 quarters. So interestingly, if you go back over the 4 prior consecutive quarters, sequential quarters, Surface revenue gains were actually 12% and 2% a year ago, but then they declined by 39% and 30% in the previous 2 quarters, respectively. So 20% may look good, but when you're looking for the answer why, right? So,
and I would presume it's primary consumer, actually.
Yeah, right.
Also, there's been no new hardware.
Yeah. I think it's a mix of issues. So the one thing in the conference call, they did say a few things. First of all, the results were in line with what they expected, which is okay. So you expect
what they telegraphed.
They expect another revenue decline. This one's going to go back up into the 30%. 30
on hardware.
30s, yep, on devices in this quarter, which I don't mean to say makes sense, but it is the quarter before
the new hardware.
Yeah. Yes, in some ways it's following the PC market. The Surface sales fell harder than the PC market overall, though. They fell harder than the Windows number, which actually mapped pretty closely to what IDC said, right? 12, somewhere between 10 and 12 or 13% decline, right?
Yeah, and that would have been the trailing indicator because the PC makers announced slowing in sales. Of course, Windows is going to take a hit.
So now I'll ask you a question because this is what they said. Tell me what you think this means. Microsoft, where did it say? Let me just find the exact quote here. I can't find it anyway. But what Microsoft said was, Microsoft is refocusing Surface to focus on higher margin products. What could that be?
HoloLens?
Well,
I don't think that.
No,
that's wrong.
There's no margin if you don't sell any.
Margin.
You can't. You have to sell them first. Yeah.
So I'm Surface is something. It did not start as a premium PC brand. It didn't.
Right.
But starting with Surface Pro 3, I would argue that's the shift. With Surface Pro 4 and Surface Book, they were very clear about it. That was we're bringing
these are flagships.
Yep, we're going premium. This is when they really started to take on Apple in the PC space, if that makes sense. Since then, sorry.
Man, I would argue that they did that to convince regular PC makers you need to build high quality gear, and we'll give you some room underneath us by being expensive.
Yeah, but then they did what they did with Lumia once they bought Nokia, which is they really just put out a bunch of low end crap. Yeah. So they I'm not going to go through each of the products, but it's the Surface Go stuff, the Surface Laptop Go, all that stuff. It's like this. I feel it tarnishes the brand.
Yeah, I thought they were playing with form factors, and they promptly disappeared too. People didn't buy them.
Right. So the two sides of Surface are they believe that they're innovators in form factor space. They're not. They've had one successful form factor.
Yeah.
And the other side is what it actually ties to that, which is they're basically putting on the copy machine and making different versions of the same thing. So they get, Pro and Go and, it's like whatever. Yeah. So to me, they didn't say this, but I feel like Surface is going to get scaled back. There'll be fewer models. You'll see fewer updates.
Well, and I would argue they've been successful because the PC market as a whole has innovated on their gear. Like, not that anybody wants a detachable keyboard, but your touch laptops have happened.
That kind of successful doesn't buy you a Ferrari. It just gives you a good reputation. Like if Surface exists to sort of like maybe the NUC did to be a reference design for PC makers to follow, I mean, I guess that's a business of some kind, but
and I wouldn't mind them. I wouldn't be surprised if they continue to just start making a small marquee line.
Yeah,
2 or 3 devices that represent substantial form. Right. Maybe one studio style device, like one weirdo form factor.
I think it makes sense. I certainly obviously we're hoping Surface would be a volume PC player. They're not. They've never been anything. But
this is schizophrenic. Like you're either, and I'm misusing the term schizophrenic, so I apologize right off the bat. Right, like this. Maybe we'll call it bipolar.
Two-faced.
Like, yeah. On one hand, it's like we're making marquee devices that by nature is boutique. You don't sell a ton of them. Oh no, we're trying to be main market. Are you really competing with the PC makers or not? Like there's a way to live in an ecosystem. Stop messing it up.
There's this myth that people, well, let me not get into that, but there's the reality is the PC market today, we see great form factor experimentation occurring, especially with Lenovo. Right, it's done an incredible dual screen device, all kinds of crazy.
And again, way too many. Like I can't keep them.
It's a little much, and they change year to year. But God bless them, they're trying, and I think that's interesting. So they're sort of satisfying that role, and we're also seeing tremendous premium PCs, especially from the market leaders, right?
Yeah,
Lenovo, HP, and Dell. You can point to numerous models from all these companies. Fantastic. I'm not sure what the role is Microsoft has to play in this world anymore. So
I think you got to keep the line functioning well enough to at least be a hammer. It's like, if you slack off, we'll build a marquee machine and embarrass you all.
Yeah. So the word Surface, like I said, did not appear in any of their public disclosures, including that.
You get a hint that they're going to phrase that term out.
I find that to be a little weird. The word AI was said 78 times, or something, whatever. Okay. And then Xbox and gaming being the final piece of the more personal computing pie. Obviously, they can't talk too much about Microsoft and Activision Blizzard, although I probably have this later in the show actually, but yeah. So I looked at if Microsoft had owned Activision Blizzard over the previous 12 months, what would Microsoft's financials look like?
Right. And
we'll look at that later, I guess. But the quick answer is not too different. Actually, like I said last week, I think some guy said, "Hey, do you think they're going to call the combined company Microsoft Activision?" I'm like, no. No, I don't. Activision's revenues in a quarter are in the single-digit billions. Microsoft's are in the double. They're not even comparable. So even within the context of more personal computing, you're looking at the difference between 13-ish billion and 2-ish billion.
Right. It's not the same league.
No, we're not changing the name.
This is not a merger. This is an acquisition.
You call it. Yeah. So gaming, not great. The two major sides of gaming are, of course, Xbox hardware and Xbox content and services, right? Mm-hmm. So hardware is consoles, software and services is games and subscriptions, right? I think here we see the past and the future of this business, right?
Sure. The hardware hasn't innovated. It is where it is. The X is the unit.
And it's not selling well,
Well, and I would argue there isn't a next generation waiting to be built because we can barely utilize the hardware as it stands.
What are we going to do? Like, we're going to have 8K that isn't really 8K. We already have 4K that's not really 4K. What's the difference?
Exactly.
And a 2x4 is not 2 inches by 4 inches. Gosh darn it.
Inflammable means flammable?
What? Irregardless, I think
yes,
they should be honest.
Word. but it speaks to, I talk to folks in the gaming industry that I know well. It's like, it's just too expensive to build a game that can fully utilize a PS5 or an X. It is. It's 300 people for 18 months. If it is the multi-billion-dollar game,
it's a Hollywood movie.
I felt guilty because I bought our son a 120 hertz display for his PS5. And I felt bad because he wanted a 240 hertz display.
Oh my God. I was like, what are you? Okay. I was wondering where that was going.
And I said, you can't have
welfare, Leo?
4K and I know I'm a bad dad. It's just a bad father. That's all there is.
Just eating gruel.
That's funny. Microsoft didn't. I could go back and find this, I think, but they didn't talk about console revenues over a 1 year period. They did talk about the content and services stuff, games and subscriptions over the previous year. So the 3 previous quarters, this part of the business experienced losses of revenue of 6%, 3%, and 12% respectively. So 3% growth last quarter, and I think 5% this quarter. This thing's trending up finally, so I guess that's good.
I'm appreciating that. We've talked about this a lot, like the Game Pass model, like what they're doing there, and what a lot of these acquisitions of gaming are really about, building out the Netflix of gaming, is working. People are buying it.
Okay. Yes, but here's the asterisk, and this ties into the vagueness thing I was talking about earlier. Let me step down. We have a business unit called More Personal Computing. Mm-hmm. This business unit, like I said, encompasses Windows, Surface, and Xbox. We don't know what percentage of each of those make up that 13.9 billion, right? We can guess, and we were probably correct, that Windows is most of it, probably over 50% of it, but we don't really know. Xbox is probably most of the rest, and Surface is the small size. That's a guess, but can we put numbers to that? No. So we have this vague box that is some percentage of More Personal Computing. And that part of the business actually has 3 parts, but the 2 big parts are Xbox hardware and Xbox software services, right? The third part is just called gaming, and it's things that are not Xbox. I don't know, whatever. But let's just say it's those 2. Yeah, so we know that hardware sales are going down by revenue percentages each quarter. We don't Okay. And we know that Xbox software services is now growing, but we also don't know what percentage of that chunk each one is. So if software and services is this tiny slice on the bottom and it's growing, it's not even growing big, but pretend it's growing big because it's small, like whatever, like that doesn't really matter. And if Xbox revenue or hardware revenues are big, but not doing great, it still might be more valuable right now to the company, right? Because it earns more. We don't know. This is the problem with not knowing.
They haven't disclosed any of this. They don't need to. Yeah. The SEC's happy with what they've reported, and close enough.
Yeah, but that's a great example of what I was talking about. Like, we can't make intelligent commentary on the relative health of these parts of the business because we don't know.
Really not given the information to do so.
Yeah.
Not to try and jump to the end of this or anything.
Well, let me just wrap this up real quick. So just looking ahead, because this is the other important part of all these businesses. Okay, they did bad. How are they going to do in the future? Bad. So overall, single-digit growth in gaming, Xbox content and services mid to high single digits. That's pretty good. Driven by first-party and third-party content. There are a lot of good games coming out in the holiday season sort of starts in this quarter. And Xbox Game Pass growth, right, which is great. By the way, absolutely no guidance at all on console sales. They hid the historical data on that, although, again, like I said, I could probably go find some of it vague.
Yeah, it's out there.
But the fact this is a little bit like Surface, didn't talk about it. It's like, oh boy, that's a little weird. But again, I think the future of this business is the part that's growing and the past is the part that's falling. Yeah. And it's not going to happen tomorrow, but I think we're looking at here's Activision Blizzard, which is going to bump up that part of the business.
Sure. Okay, one would speculate what's the only thing that's going to really revise the game business meaningfully is a significant change in tooling. If these machine learning models for building resources get good enough that the major game brands start using them, I'm talking to software developers, not necessarily in gaming, in other areas that are really getting involved with large language models and these kinds of tools. And they're talking about 10 and 20% performance improvements. Like, we've been using them long enough now that we're seeing multiple sprints go by and they're consistently outperforming past development efforts.
So one of the phrases I found myself repeating as I thought and wrote about this stuff was this notion of something raising all ships, right? This notion that AI, or whatever. And as you said that, you gave me another example of it, which is, you're talking about major publishers using this, but what happens when the democratization of this happens, which it is happening, as Microsoft moves Copilot, GitHub Copilot, which we'll talk about in a bit, to what they think of as GitHub Copilot X, right, which is a series of kind of three big advances.
Yep.
Can individual developers pay whatever it is, $20 a month, and as game developers, and maybe start creating games that are more sophisticated, more easily, and not need to take on all that investment and team size. And exactly.
Yeah. Maybe you mentioned Hollywood, which is all on strike right now, and I think part of it is that we are seeing the democratization of that kind of movie making because of this technology as well. That the armies of people that used to make
making
CGI.
Movies on iPhones. Right? Or the CGI that in the 1970s and 80s required a Lucasfilm or ILM or whatever. And then by the early 2000s, you had things like the new Battlestar Galactica show, which was just completely off-the-shelf computer-generated graphics, which looked great, for the time. And now we can make those ourselves.
Yeah.
Using literally like App Store apps.
Yep.
That stuff is amazing. So
keep going further.
Yep.
But the overarching theme here is AI. They made this pivot to AI because they needed something new to create buzz, and it worked. It worked.
Yep. This is the thing. Like I said, I went into this. Look, I'm going to cover those topics I just blew through in an excited fashion. That's my thing. But this year's been all about AI. Microsoft announced the Bing chat stuff in February. Yep. Since then, it's announced the Copilot stuff. So now we have this range, and also GitHub, which already exists. So GitHub Copilot probably from a year ago, maybe even 2. I don't remember, but whenever that started, we now have that kind of AI permeating all of Microsoft thing happening, right? It's not all there, but it's happening everywhere.
No, it seems apparent that Satya Nadella did a Bill Gates type letter inside the company that said, "Thou shalt build copilots," and every team has had to respond.